The girls who came back, who had been given as sex slaves, were always the worst off, in the sense that they were victims, but 3 times victims, I would say. They were first-time victim because they were raped at a very young age of 12, 13. As soon as they started menstruating, they were given as wives, often for years. Then when they came back, they were shunned by the community, especially those who came back with babies from captivity. They were called all kinds of names, wife of Coney, these were children from the bush. But also they had, because they were abducted at a young age, the LRA targeted very young girls, so that they were virgins and they had no AIDS, HIV AIDS. And then they would be the first to use them. So they were abducted at a very young age, and they had no education. They were still in primary school, so they had no skills, they had no education. So by the time they came out, they were in their 20s, they couldn't read or write, they had no skills, they couldn't do any job, they couldn't even run a business because they couldn't count, they had no notice of mathematics, anything. So they were victims in so many ways. Some of them would want to go back to the bush and back to the man who abducted and raped them. The Stockholm Syndrome, we would call that in the Western world. For them, apart from the bond they felt with that man, because they would always say, at least he protected me. This man brought them in a very dangerous situation where they were shot at from all sides, they were in a war area all the time, but he in a way protected them. So that's how they saw it. So, and then additionally, in the situation of northern Uganda, nobody else would marry a girl from the bush, a girl who had been abducted. So there was no way, they couldn't look after their children because they had no education, no job. So the only one who could look after these children was the very same man who produced them, who abducted them, raped them, produced those children. So we didn't know how to handle these situations. There's a lot about the Stockholm Syndrome, a lot of literature, but I have not found anywhere an answer to how to deal with the victims. We also used an African approach in the sense that we worked with symbols, like when they returned from captivity. The first thing, we would give them food, we would give them new clothes, and the old clothes were burned publicly. Everyone was standing around the fire, so to get rid of the past, to start a new life, and to also get rid of the evil spirits that were in those clothes. Some of those clothes were stolen from or were taken from people that they had been forced to kill, and they were forced to wear their clothes. So to get rid of all this past and to start a new life. Also, when the children arrived, they were welcomed by the other children. They had special songs for them to welcome them back home, back into their community. We worked a lot with drawings. We tried to get the worst details out of these kids. We always compared it with like helping them to vomit. The things they could not digest and which would block them from functioning as a normal human being had to come out in one way or another. And that was through talking, through singing, through poems, through theater. They would reenact their own abduction. They would reenact the fighting in the bush. So we never forced anybody. They were all volunteers. We asked who wanted to take part in the role plays, and it had amazing results. We tried to send them back to school, which was not easy. They were now so old. Some were 28 now, 25 years old. So we tried to teach them a job. But there are only so many jobs available. Like we sent many of them for tailoring, and then we gave them a sewing machine. But there are so many tailors already. The market was satisfied, and they couldn't. Very few made a living out of it. There are girls who made it. There is even one girl who was given as a wife to Vincent Otti, who was the number 2 of the LRA. And this girl was very successful. She went to secondary school and finished university. And she is now looking after a lot of other girls who returned from captivity. So we have one who became a lawyer, one of the Aboke Girls of my book. She even did her practicum at The Hague, at the ICC in The Hague. We have another one who became a journalist, who is now a journalist in America. We have another one who works for the First Lady's office. We have another one who is the head of the zoo of Uganda, who studied wildlife management. So we have success stories, but I would say for the majority of the girls who were abducted for a long period of time and who returned with children, life is still very difficult. I personally think the worst problem is for the girls, and especially the girls who came back with children from captivity. And linked also to the fact that they had no education. They are not considered by the community as educated people, so they have low self-esteem because of that. So I think the other problem is, of course, a general problem of Africa. What can they do that is marketable, that they, our income generating activities involved a lot of things, like tailoring was only one thing, setting up a small business was another thing, but also, for example, what we discovered was giving them a bicycle and a bag of charcoal was the most successful activity, but that is more for boys than for girls. So they could then ride around and sell goods. They started with a bag of charcoal. With the money they bought another one, and the bicycle is a means of transport here. So they could have a small trade by going around with certain goods. So that was, for example, a successful activity. Beehives and making honey was also a successful activity. But these are more jobs for boys than for girls. It's difficult to find a marketable skill in not only Uganda but all over Africa for girls. Now, agriculture could be a good activity for both boys and girls, men and women, especially with the prices now up, with the market in Southern Sudan, the market in Congo. But then again, you need a plot. And the culture here is that when a girl marries, she goes and stays with the man in the home of the man. So these girls have no home. I mean, often they are not accepted back in their own home. They can't find another husband to look after them and the children, and they can't get a plot. It's difficult for Africa to compete with the rest of the world because they came so late. When the rest of the world were in the Industrial Revolution, Africa was colonized, and they were, they never caught up afterwards. Now we are already at another stage. We are already in the computer technology and all that. But Africa missed so much. They missed this industrial revolution, the digital revolution. So for them to catch up, it's very difficult. The same, for example, with clothes, tailoring. It's very difficult for them to compete with all the second-hand clothes that are pouring in from all over the world, but also with the cheap clothes from China. So the government has now raised the taxes on those imports, but still it's difficult for them to compete. There have been over the years several programs for northern Uganda to reconstruct, rehabilitate northern Uganda. The first program was run by the government and local government, and as with a lot of these initiatives, a lot of money disappeared, was stolen. There was a lot of corruption involved. So then NUSAF came, and the government did not want it to be channeled through the government structures. It said that people could come up with initiatives. They could form their own small NGOs, civil society groups, communities, and come up with initiatives. There, I think with the latest program, more money got into the community than with the previous programs, where a lot was just disappeared in the pockets of some government officials. Now it was much more community-based. We had a small local NGO within Rakele, and we had special programs on radio with the money of NUSAF. So I was not directly involved, but my staff were, and I encouraged them. So we got money, but there was no supervision at all. I remember that at the end of the program, we wanted to justify the money that we received from NUSAF. We had made a report, we wanted to show the receipts, and there was nobody we could turn to show what we had done. So I really wondered, how is this being supervised? Anybody could form a small community, a small NGO. Anybody could get money. And that was it. And then nobody came to ask you to justify what happened to the money. So because we had the experience ourselves in the center with such a project, I really wondered, who is supervising all this? But at least when money was stolen, it was stolen by ordinary people. It was by all those thousands of small groups who had handed in a project. I remember that we did a story in the New Vision about the corruption in NUSAF and how much money was stolen. And it was a lot of money that was stolen, but it was still only like 1% of the total, because the total amount was so huge that even this amount was big, it was still only 1%. And I remember that the minister then reacted to our story saying, yeah, but look, it's only 1% of the total. Were all those projects useful? You can doubt that. Anybody who handed in a project was being funded. But at least a lot of money was poured into the communities. And I think a lot more went down to the grassroots than with the previous government programs.